Hello everybody, and welcome to the latest in a series of Nautical Institute webinars. My name is Bridget Hogan, and I'm Director of Publishing and Membership at the Nautical Institute. And this morning, I am pleased to welcome along two participants in our seminar on Stowaways by Sea and Rescue of Migrants. We have the author of our latest book, which we are launching today on the topic, Stephen Jones, and we have Yves Vandenborn in Singapore, who is with the Standard Club. So, to those of you who are new to the Nautical Institute, allow me to just take a second or so to introduce us. We are a professional membership organisation for those in control of seagoing vessels. This can include people ashore as well as people at sea. We are here to try to develop and publicise best practice. So we want to go beyond the minimum, and we want to help people in a most practical way to apply their own company's rules as well as those that they face internationally, nationally, regionally, and so on. Today we're welcoming as many as 200 people to this seminar, which is going to address a very important issue, we feel, one that's time-honoured, I'm afraid, as far as seafarers are concerned, and one that really is not totally understood by people ashore necessarily. I equate it really to having discovered people hiding in a cupboard in your own home. A seafarer's vessel is not just a place of work, it is their home as well. So this is Stowaways is a very threatening situation for people to face. And then again with migrants, who do you know who you are taking on? These people are in great distress, and they are certainly possibly ill from a mental or a physical point of view, if not both. And it would be very difficult for you to take on board into your home 100 people or even 10 or 20 people and find refuge for them. So this is a very complex topic, and I have to say, and Stephen I think will agree, that we took quite a lot of time and care and patience over the gestation of this second edition to our maritime security series, because it is quite a delicate situation to deal with, and we were determined to shake it down in a way that gave people real technical but practical advice as well. And of course we're aware that things do change and that it's quite hard when you're making decisions on the ground. So we're not trying to suggest that the book holds all the solutions, but we hope it will prompt people on vessels and ashore to see how they can progress the issue. However, you're not really here to listen to me. I would like to hand over now to Stephen to see if he can explain on these two very important topics a little bit more detail. Stephen, would you like to take the chair now, please? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I'm just going to run through a very brief presentation to hopefully set the scene a little bit of where the book came from, the ideas behind it, and of what we're trying to achieve with the book. I'm very proud to be a member of the Nautical Institute and an author for a number of years. And that pride is because of the focus that we have within the books and what we try to achieve with those kind of guidelines that we produce, and as Bridget says, that we take a lot of time agonizing over, because we try to understand not just the problem, not always just the solution, but how we join those two together, and the journey that seafarers and management ashore have to take, and the wider industry. So this book, the new edition, it's really about recognizing the difficulties that seafarers and companies are faced with. It's about trying to identify the problems, the risks that are faced, and of the ways of dealing with them, of mitigating and ultimately trying to minimize those risks. It's also very much about developing the skills and the knowledge, and not just developing the resources, but making sure people feel they have the right resources to address the problems. So there's only so much you can achieve with a book, but there's a lot too. So really, within the pages of this, and I'm very pleased to say that I'm holding a copy of it in my hands, it's all about guidance. It's trying to make what is a real, difficult, problematic issue into something that can be understood. So there's guidance, there's information, but equally too, one of the things that the Nautical Institute publications are especially about is encouragement. It's about not just saying this is a terrible thing that you're going to face, now get on with it. This is a terrible thing that you're going to face, and here's how you can deal with it. These are the people that should be helping you. These are the tools that you need. And then ultimately we're able to develop good practice and even some best practice. And obviously, when it comes to stowaways, the best practice is you don't let them on board the vessel. Unfortunately, in many cases, they do get on board. So what do you do then? You know, how do you deal with that situation? How do you contain stowaways safely? How do you keep the safety of those on board? And how do you maintain the rights? And the rights issue is a really difficult issue that people have to deal with. The book goes into issues such as empowering ships' crews to act with authority, with confidence, to be able to do the right things. Record keeping is another major issue in this, and I will talk about it here, and we'll subsequently, I'm sure, talk about it as we discuss further. But record keeping is an immensely important part. Shipping is a business, so how do we minimize the financial implications? And also, how do we deal with the shoreside activities? How can a ship's crew deal with the management pressures ashore? And how can they interact and deal with those in decision-making processes, whether it's in the port, whether it's in a port state, flag state? What are the roles and responsibilities and the ways of interacting? When we first wrote the book a few years ago, the first edition, it was very much the focus was on stowaways by sea. But just around that time, we were starting to see more and more problems emerging with the issue of migrants. And of course, again, a terrible, difficult, emotive issue, and one that there's no easy solution to. So there is a focus in the book within this, talking about the obligations of rescue, what rescue actually, entails, how it's managed, how we maintain security on board, which of course is an important issue. In this day and age, obviously with the pandemic that we're currently facing globally, quarantine becomes an issue. How do we deal with that? We don't know where these people are from. We don't know what they're afflicted with. So how do you deal with those issues such as quarantine? So we touch upon that within the book. And again, no shortcuts. There's no way to avoid it. That record keeping is a hugely important part of that for everything, from operations, from security, from safety, and from issues such as dealing with infectious diseases. There is also the criminal element that we have to consider as well, and that's a big part of what we look at within the book. Again, always trying to allow seafarers to deal with things the best they can. An important part of this is closing it. How do we deal with the problem to get it gone, to get the ship operating well again? And of course, hammering that message home of record keeping. It's about getting the right information to the right people at the right time, and we talk about that in detail and in depth in the book. Not just to allow the ship to operate again safely, to minimize the financial implications as we discussed, but also to properly allow those investigations that have to happen so we can look and understand the problems and the solutions, and ultimately how we feed up the chain to the International Maritime Organization so that we can have a proper reporting process. So there's lots of talk of data in shipping, so how they have the right of data to be able to kind of feed down the chain in the industry and ultimately make the fixes that we need. So that there's a huge, important, influential role on making sure we report up that chain. Of course, stowaways, migrants, issues on the sea don't exist in a vacuum. The world is a very complicated place, and if you add water into that mix, it gets even more complicated. So the Stowaways by Sea book sits as part of a wider view of maritime security. And I'm very proud, again, to be the author of a number of these books within the Nautical Institute portfolio. We have a kind of overarching book looking at maritime security in its kind of wider sense, through the International Ship and Port Facility Security Code, through the ways that people keep ships and trade secure, coping with piracy, now with stowaways at sea, and we'll shortly be looking at crime at sea as well. So again, these books pull together to try and give the practical solutions that are needed on vessels. But again, always at its core, encouraging seafarers to feel empowered, to question what they see. Why is that being done? Why are we having to face that issue? What can we do about it? Is this the right approach that we're using? So really trying to give in their hand seafarers the answers that they need, but not always just answers, but the sense that they are part of the solution. So they're able to understand the different roles, the pressures, and the things that are facing them. And that's very much what the guide that we're discussing today is about, but also the wider sense of what the Nautical Institute publications are about. We're a professional organisation with professional members, and I'm sure Bridget will be very happy to tell you more about that. And in a moment, we'll be having more discussion, questions that I know many of you have sent in. But more importantly, there's a 40% discount on the books today. So again, I hope Bridget will be able to tell you more about how you can get hold of the book. And we'll now be able to take some questions and have a bit more of a kind of wider discussion about what is going on. So I'll hand over back to Bridget now. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. Yes, I think what you've explained is how the book is part of the wider ethos of the Nautical Institute, which is very much a mentoring role. We want to help and support people, whether they're on a vessel or whether they're ashore, whenever they're dealing with a problem. I think one of the things to bear in mind is that every problem is actually very individual, and that it's not easy to generalize what you could be facing and therefore what the answer may be. But there are lots of people in the Nautical Institute who do have experience probably of what you've been facing, and therefore through our membership, through our publications, through our technical team at HQ, and through the 7,000 members who are organised in branches regionally, and also through our governance system, which includes technical, for instance, a technical committee, we can help to seek answers or to help understand how best practice can evolve and change. And Stephen very rightly mentioned that some of these issues we cannot influence ourselves. They are part of a wider network and community that can be brought together in areas such as the International Maritime Organization. And the Nautical Institute is represented there as an NGO, a non-governmental organization. And we do put forward the arguments on behalf, particularly of serving seafarers. And that's a very powerful voice for people. We don't always succeed. Who does at an international UN agency like that? But it's very important that we get people's feedback so that we can feed that in. And that is expected of us at IMO. That's why they asked us to become an NGO. So let's turn to some questions now and see how we can help you with what you're dealing with. And I'm going to deal with them as they come in, first come, first served. The first one is looking at a very difficult issue with migrants. Now, I know migrants are a terribly emotive issue for people who have to pick them up. And it's not just merchant, it's military as well. I was talking to someone in the Italian Navy, an admiral, and he said his people are all trained to deal with casualties in combat, but they're not used to seeing civilian casualties, and they're plucking dead children out of the water. It is terribly, terribly traumatic. And here's a question about another emotive issue. If the crew believes that the migrants or refugee boats are being willfully scuttled to prevent arrest or return, what are the options as a ship's master now trying to make decisions about these? I'm particularly worried about the spread of COVID-19. And that, to be frank, it's not just that. There are other diseases that these poor people could well be suffering from, and therefore in a position to potentially infect other people, including the ship's crew. So what do you think about that? I'm not sure who would like to look at that one first. Would you like to consider that one, Stephen?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's obviously P&I implications, so we can perhaps talk, Yves can tell more about that in a minute. I think the problem is, you know, at what point does the issue really begin? And whenever I've been working in maritime security, there was always a focus on the maritime security angle, but there is a point at which a maritime security incident becomes safety. It just becomes safety. You know, oh, there's a bomb. What's the bomb done? Well, it's blown the ship up. Now you're into a safety issue. And I think that's very much similar to this in the fact that, you know, people in the water need to be rescued. I don't think we should be really having an emphasis on, you know, seafarers and masters having to make that decision about, oh, well, was it deliberately scuttled? It doesn't matter. You know, the 5-year-old child that was at the back of the boat needs rescuing. It doesn't matter whether someone at the front was, you know, willfully destroying the boat. And I think the minute we start into presupposing that people should, you know, overcomplicate things, then we're going to get more and more problems in an already very complicated issue. So I think you know, it really is important that the focus is on rescuing people at sea, and then we get into the wider issue of what the implications are beyond that. But you know, if you saw someone in the water, you would want to rescue them, and I think that remains as true as it was, you know, hundreds of years ago to today as well. The issue of them coming aboard, I think P&I clubs have issued lots of guidance on dealing with quarantine issues, so maybe we'll get into that. And I don't know if Yves has some thoughts on that, maybe.
Yeah, I would agree with you, Stephen, actually. No matter what the feelings are of that particular master or crew on board, there is not much choice. SOLAS requires you to rescue these people, even if they put themselves in danger. That doesn't mean that it's an easy task. I think definitely we understand that it is difficult, but there are certain measures you can take as a crew to make sure that you don't come too much into contact, that you keep them separate from the rest of the crew, even though you still have the duty to care for them. But you can make sure that there is not too much interaction, so that there is a minimal risk of the crew on board catching any virus or COVID or any other disease onto them. And then the first thing you do, basically after you call your owner or your manager, is call your P&I club and get our machine working and be of assistance to guide you to a port where they can be discharged legally and provide the assistance that the crew needs.
And I have a question here, which is, I think, quite interesting. It talks about how to help with piracy. Private security teams were placed on vessels, and there's a question: is there a scope for anything around this? Now, I think this might more relate to dealing with migrants once they're on board, because I know last week there was an incident on a vessel that was denied entry to Malta, and a fight broke out between migrants, and they had knives. So this is dealing much more with the security issue rather than the health issue now. It is a big thought, isn't it? When you're going through certain waters, just as there was a piracy risk in certain waters. What do you think about that, Stephen? You've done a lot about private security in the past.
Yeah, I mean, it's everything's a difficult issue, but you're almost in the position of having kind of Schrodinger's refugee. You kind of, on one hand, you've got to rescue them, but then the other hand, you're terrified of rescuing them and the implications of that. So I think there becomes a problem. Private security is fantastic and works wonderfully well, but within very set, understood, controlled and managed parameters. So if the security team are on board to keep security after you've rescued, then I guess that's the management decision and the processes in place to have that managed. If you're getting into a situation where you're trying to keep the people that you're on a bound to rescue off the vessel, and you get into some kind of strange catch-22 philosophical issue that is probably beyond the scope of many of us to be able to fix, certainly in a half an hour. So I think security at every point, security is about intelligence, and security is about knowing the threats that you're going to be faced with and then understanding what can be done to manage them. Without any shadow of a doubt, when you get into these large-scale migrant rescue situations, and large scale doesn't have to be hundreds of people. If you've only got 10 people on board the vessel and all of a sudden you've got 20, 30 migrants on board, then the balance changes so much. So it's about understanding the risks that you're actually facing and then coming up with the right solutions that are safe, legal, ethical, effective and pragmatic in dealing with them. So, it can be a solution, but it needs to be very carefully considered.
Do you have any views on that from P&I, Yves? Is that it's not something I think we've come up against so far, is it?
It's not something that I can immediately remember that we would have seen, that we would have come across. I mean, yes, of course, we see armed guards on board for passage through piracy areas.
Yeah.
We've not come across it for passage, for example, for the whole Mediterranean Sea, just in case you need to go and pick up migrants that are in need.
Sure.
No, I think it would be an expensive solution. If the owners or the charterers want to agree to that. Is it the right solution? I don't know. I'm not too sure whether you want armed guards on board to deal with it. It's going to put the other people on edge as well.
But I tell you what I'd like to come to now is another question on ports. And I think ports and to be frank, land nations generally are much more important and influential in this issue in many ways. We always said with piracy that the solution was on land, and I do think this has been a major failure of the UN because a lot of reluctance around countries to accept ships carrying migrants, of course, is because they are left with the problem individually. I think this question relates much more to stowaways, however. It says that the ports need proper vettings, and in that case should lose their certificate. I'm not sure that ports do have a certificate, but obviously there's some idea here that there should be another layer of compliance. There's a feeling that port safety is at stake here, and of course this is something over which the vessel can have no control whatsoever. And it comes back, I think, Stephen, to advice in the book about how to secure the vessel, which is really important from all aspects as well. You don't want anybody coming on board, whether they're a stowaway or someone who wants to steal your precious digital camera. Isn't that the case?
Yeah, I mean, I always think of it in terms of, the interface between the ship and the land is the port, and an interface implies some kind of partnership, a shared endeavor. And I think with ships taking every step that they can to ensure their security, it has to be matched and, you know, reflected in what goes on within the port itself. Some ports are fantastic, and you know, you know yourself as you drive past them or through them and into them, whatever. You know, there's a lot of emphasis on security. And there always traditionally has been, because they wanted to keep the cargo secure, if nothing else. So, you know, there has been that focus in many ports. But I think, you know, any port that you go into, you want to be reassured that they're going to be doing the things that match you. They want you to be as safe and secure as they themselves want to be. It's heartening that many ports are now starting to embrace, you know, the kind of smart port concept, where they're investing heavily, and even ports in maybe places where traditionally there hasn't been that level of investment. So, you know, you think of the likes of Africa and maybe some smaller ports around Asia, whereas there wasn't that emphasis because they just wanted to build a place where ships can come into, the mechanism for them to deal with cargo, and that was really it. Now you're starting to understand the data side of things, and where you start to have a focus on data, then every implication has a kind of, you know, magnified result itself. So I think we're starting to see the investment improve. So that's great. But those ports that do have problems, you know, again, we have to flag those up. And it's great that the mechanism for members of the Nautical Institute exists, and the unions and the ITF and all the rest of it. Where there are problems, these need to be highlighted. Again, this was the focus on record keeping. You know, if you are not happy with the port because of XYZ, then that has to be reported. It has to be documented and communicated. And again, you know, there's, you know, P&I clubs are eager to find out what's happening about things. So, you know, again, you know, Yves would encourage their members to get in that mix, that conversation. You know, these are the problems, and then we can start highlighting them, so that seafarers and ships that call into the ports don't feel alone. They don't feel as if they're in conflict with the ports that are you know, that they're going into. I think it's really important that we have a balanced playing field. And I think that was always a little bit of the concern over the ISPS code, that ships, there was such a heavy, you know, certification element to what ships had to do, but the ports were kind of maybe signed off by their own kind of, you know, literal state, port state, whatever. And well, they're not going to find their own ports, you know, not up to scratch. So there was a huge political dimension to this. And that needs to be dealt with, recognised, understood, and a ship should be confident in the port that it's visiting. And if it's not, it should be able to deal with, you know, escalating those concerns up a chain.
Yeah, it's a real difficult predicament. Listen, I've got 4 more questions, and I think we've got time for them, especially as I intend to combine 2 of them. You'll see why. But the first question that I want to pose to you guys is, I think, quite a simple one. It says, if migrants on boats are not a danger, are masters still obliged to rescue them? Now, I'm not quite sure how danger is assessed here, because frankly speaking, these people are being trafficked by criminals, however legitimate we feel their quest is, whether they're fleeing political unrest or war, or are what are called economic migrants, rather. I think that's a disparaging remark, but that's my personal view. But is there an obligation to rescue? But I suspect that a lot of the time, these vessels don't look seaworthy. I mean, is there a quick answer to this one, Stephen?
I mean, from my perspective, the worst thing as a seafarer, and the worst thing we can do for seafarers, is make pronouncements from the shore. It'd be far too easy for any of us to sit in our, you know, nice home offices or whatever, and start to try to get in the eyes and the heads or the hearts of seafarers and tell them what they have to do. I think, you know, there has to be the mechanism of trust, respect, and honest assessment that seafarers faced with the actual situation are allowed to act on. That said, we need to make and facilitate the processes by which they are interacting with us all. So, you know, they have a decision to make, and only they can really honestly make it, you know. But equally, if they see people and they make that call, they weren't in danger, you know. It's hard to look at yourself in the mirror or go to sleep at night if you maybe have sailed past a load of people who then subsequently go on to die. You know, it's a judgment call. It's a moral, ethical, you know, and responsible judgment call. Not one I think that we can make from here, and not one that I think we should tell people what to do. But at the heart of what it is to be a seafarer has always been that ethical drive that if people are in trouble, we rescue people in trouble. And it's a very different.
True, it is such a hard thing, and it's so hard. And if it's hard for the military, who receive extensive training, generally in search and rescue, it is far more difficult for civilian crews, obviously. We have a question, two questions here, which I think are pretty related. It says one of them is about deviating to a port of refuge to discharge migrants, and whether the vessel goes off hire. That's quite a technical issue around charter parties, I think. But related to it, I think, is how, as a master, do you proceed if you are unable to land any rescued migrants? It is a huge dilemma. People are being denied entry. Where does that put them legally, and where does that put them practically? I don't know which of you would like to have perhaps a short go at that one.
I think it depends really very much on a case-by-case basis, but normally a charter party will have a clause that stipulates how to deal with deviation, and certainly deviation in case that they have to deal either stowaways or migrants. The normal principle, as far as I know, is that the ship should continue towards its destination, but behind the scenes, the P&I, the owner, will work together to find the best suitable and nearest port where it is legally allowed to discharge either the stowaways or the migrants. And until that port has been found, the master should not go into the nearest port.
No, thank you. That's very sound advice. And one questioner here says he feels that ports are going their own individual way here when it's the governments that are actually calling the shots, as he terms it. Is it correct to lay the onus on individual ports? I think this depends country to country, really, doesn't it? I don't think a lot of ports necessarily have a load of powers here, and again it comes back to the solution being on land far more than on sea.
And not all ports are created equal. They don't look the same, they don't feel the same, and they don't have the same kind of powers of influence, I guess. And it's there are some that probably could do more, should do more, and could have more influence. There are some that are very much just a place where the ships come in and they get dealt with, and if it happens to be good, it's good, and if it's not, I think if I could just go back very slightly to that question of the pressures on the master. Totally, all whatever the charter party says, whatever the kind of legal obligations or whatever. But I think in these situations, the most a master could hope for is, before they're even joining the ship or whatever, is understanding of, do they feel that their company does support them, or would, almost having that conversation with themselves, what will happen in the event of something going wrong? Do I feel confident that the company's set up to deal with it? Do I feel confident? When I get into these difficult situations, am I going to be supported and resourced and have the answers and the interactions that I need to deal with this? And if there's a sense that you're not, then you need to start asking the questions and start, really understanding why. Why do I feel that I'm not going to get the support I need? And I think sometimes maybe we overlook that. There's a kind of an optimism in joining a ship that things are going to be okay, where maybe we do need to ask the questions ourselves. And we had some quite prescriptive questions there about various issues. And that's not really what the book is about. There are issues covered and there are steps and guidance and the things that you can do to help. But actually, it's a lot about that empowerment, understanding you're going to be faced with difficult situations and these other parties have a role to play in this. So don't be alone. Don't be concerned about what will happen alone. There are meant to be support mechanisms around this issue, and get in the midst of them for the answers that you need. Because when there are migrants on board, when you're faced with having to rescue, that's not the time to be pondering whether you're going to get the support you need.
Yes, absolutely. I agree, and I think it is about building that confidence. And your text in the book helps to provide the framework and the questions that they can feed back into management ashore to ensure that they do get that confidence and that resource to help them. I'm going to take this as a final question now and suggest to people that if we haven't had time to get to your questions, that you email the email address on the screen there, pubs.admin@nautins.org, and ask us further questions. We're more than happy to take this subject further after the webinar. And if you forget about that email address, don't worry, you can go to the Contact Us section of the Nautical Institute's website and get through to anyone to help, and particularly me if that's of help. This is about weighing up the difference between, as the questioner puts it, refugees or a security threat. I don't know that anyone really can be complacent about who these strangers are that they are taking on board. And it comes down to it again, doesn't it? This is unknown, and there are implications around every step that you take.
I mean, apart from buying the book, the one bit of advice that I would give anyone today is it's a Friday. Often people do drills on a Friday. Do a rescue drill. Have someone, coming on board that you're not sure about, that you suspect, whether they might be infected or something. See what happens. How does the crew deal with it? See how your office deals with it. And from the office ashore, have a drill. Phone up your flag state. What do they have to say about it? Does the person pick up the phone? Do they care? Are they engaging with you? Practice it now. Do it this afternoon. Have that drill. And then you'll be in a far better position to know what's happening than you were if you just kind of start wondering. There's lots of things we can start to do to get the ball rolling. There'll never be the simple answers to massive problems that affect seafarers and ships, but we can try to kind of baby step towards the answers. And sometimes that's by highlighting the problems. So that would be my kind of closing advice this afternoon, to go and have a drill.
Splendid.
I would agree. Sorry, Bridget.
You would like to, I just was saying, is there anything you would like to say to summarize?
I would agree with Stephen. I think it is a good idea to do more training for the crew. It's something. I know that there is a long list of drills that they have to do on board of ships, and this is just yet again another one. But I do think it is important to properly prepare the seafarer and the ships for this. And by all means, contact your P&I club, get them involved. There will, not just in ours, in all the IG clubs, there will be loss prevention people there that are more than happy to help with carrying out a drill like this, with doing particular training for your ship owner or at your manning agent. So by all means, get in touch with your P&I club and get in touch with your local branch of the Nautical Institute and get them to help you out as well.
Yes, there is help out there. There is help and advice. People have gone through all of this before. So there's a huge resource to be tapped in the Nautical Institute amongst its members. And I think that's the strength that we have, that there's practical advice out there from people who have had to deal with it. And you can learn from their lessons, good and bad. We know that people have had to deal with violent migrants. We saw an incident last week, for instance. So, it is a worrying thing for people. But on the whole, I know that seafarers are pleased to be able to help people in distress. And I think it's a hugely generous thing that they do. And you know, it's sad that some people are exploiting that, but I think on the whole that these are a lot of very distressed people. And I will say that there are implications, obviously, for crews who've had to undergo these experiences. And one of the things that we have put together, actually from the days when piracy was at its height, but it's certainly still relevant today, is a booklet which we provide for free on our website, which discusses how people who've gone through traumatic stress can deal with it. And we had that written with a professor of psychology with the help of Human Rights at Sea. So have a look on our website, because we do have a lot of free resources. We're very lucky. We have a lot of people sponsor us so that we can keep as much practical advice and share as many experiences between ourselves, free for the benefit of the whole of the industry. And I really would encourage you, if you like what you see, to join us, because it does make us stronger and it helps us get our message out there. Now, I will say this webinar has been recorded, and it's going to be available on our YouTube channel and on our website later today. So if you've missed anything or you want to recap on anything, then please do go and see it there. You'll also be able to see all the other webinars that we have recorded up to now and that we will continue to record. And please do get in touch if you have some idea about subjects we should tackle that you are, particularly interested in. The book is available, as Stephen said, at a 40% discount. This means it's £27 instead of the usual price of £45. But contact us at pubs.admin@Nautinst if you've got any questions that we didn't have time to answer, and if there's anything else that you would like to tackle with us. So I would like to say thank you to everybody who attended today. I would especially like to thank those people who asked us some very interesting and thought-provoking questions. It's a very complex topic. It can't be covered in a webinar intricately, I know, but the book does help to give advice and build foundations for you to either help you as a crew member or advise people that you can influence as crew members. So thank you indeed to Stephen and to Yves for joining us today from the UK and Singapore, and to everybody who joined us from all around the world. We hope to see you at the next webinar and at the next branch meeting, and as a member if you're not already. Goodbye, everybody. Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you.